Welcome to Westminster Watch. I'm Nick Dubois. Coming up on the show, Britain takes the lead on artificial intelligence, getting world powers, including China and the US, to work together to regulate the technology.
I am not Morgan Freeman, and what you see is not real.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak warned technology will change the way we live, but will it also alter the way we are governed, with AI now able to invent credible video and audio of anything we want it to? Before the summit kicked off at the home of the World War II Enigma codebreakers, there was already something to announce. The Bletchley Declaration has been signed by 28 countries and the EU. The signatories agree that international cooperation will be vital in managing the risks of AI as it evolves rapidly. Speaking at the summit, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said,
"Until now, the only people testing the safety of new AI models have been the very companies developing it. That must change. So building on the G7 Hiroshima process and the global partnership on AI, like-minded governments and AI companies have today reached a landmark agreement. We will work together on testing the safety of new AI models before they are released."
After the main event ended, Sunak did something slightly unusual for a Prime Minister, hopping into the interviewer's seat to talk to Tesla CEO Elon Musk. Despite the tech billionaire being an early investor in AI technology, he is one of the main voices warning that it could lead to human extinction.
Well, I think we are seeing the most disruptive force in history here. Where we have for the first time, we will have for the first time something that is smarter than the smartest human. And that, I mean, it's hard to say exactly what that moment is, but there will come a point where no job is needed. You can have a job if you want to have a job for sort of personal satisfaction, but the AI will be able to do everything. So I don't know if that makes people comfortable or uncomfortable.
AI has developed remarkably quickly. Just take a look at this.
We need some fresh ideas. Better, stronger, and effective.
Have the Russians really managed to get a sneak peek at top officials tussling in private with the day's big questions? Well, no. As deepfake videos go, it's meant to be satirical rather than intentionally misleading. But it does show how fast the technology is progressing. And then there was Labour leader Keir Starmer, or a fake AI copy of him, purportedly using strong language towards a staff member. The supposed recording was released before a local election. We've chosen not to play it. But like it or not, such fake content is increasingly going to be part of elections in the future. Now, let's bring in our panel. Alex Crowley, advisor to former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Adi Kohler, founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Data Protection and Privacy, and Maria Farrell, a technology policy analyst. Welcome. Maria, let me start with you, if I may. At the AI conference that Rishi Sunak convened and led, there was agreement that they needed to agree on regulatory powers for the future. Overall, would you say that the conference was a success?
Well, I suppose it depends on how you determine success. I think if you're looking at Rishi Sunak and thinking that he's interviewing for his next job in Silicon Valley, then probably it was quite a successful endeavour for him, albeit a little expensive for us as taxpayers.
It did seem a little bizarre, his interview with Elon Musk, didn't it? That he was interviewing Elon Musk.
Yeah, I mean, it was...
Is that why you think there was a little bit of that?
It was toe-curlingly embarrassing, wasn't it? I mean, I was cringing. I felt so bad to be honest, I felt so bad for the UK at a moment like that, for the Prime Minister of a sovereign nation, a G7 member, to be a supplicant to a mere oligarch. I mean, surely the country is better than that.
Quite a strong word, an oligarch. Is it fair to say that probably more people around the world have paid attention to AI as a result of him sharing a platform with Elon Musk than anything else?
I think Elon Musk's followers will always look at things that Elon Musk does. If we get back to the conference, so I think the principles that were agreed are good principles. They echo very much what the OECD had to say 3 or 4 years ago, and so I think that's a good thing. Having 27 countries plus the European Union sign up to them, all good. The principles themselves are relatively empty. They don't commit anyone to any particular action. I think what is useful and a good and constructive development is the launching of AI safety institutes here in the UK, in the US, and also in Singapore. I think that's actually got a bit of legs in it. It's practical.
Got a bit of teeth. Ardy, let me ask you. And I'm almost loath to bring Elon Musk back into this, but he and the Prime Minister, before their conference, were talking about the existential threat to the world. Yeah. Should the conference be, or should we be more concerned about, if you like, protecting the societal interests, our freedoms, our personal interests from the threat of AI? Is that more of a threat than the existential threat?
I think at this moment in time, we're looking at something which is emerging. We don't know exactly where this is going to take us. But from a societal point of view, ethics is really important. It's not just regulation. It's not just law. It's not just about privacy. It's about all those things together. I think some of the observations that we made watching it from the television and reading it from the press was actually there was a greater depth to what should have been discussed. Yes, the threat to, humankind and all that is well known. It reminded me of the film by Steven Spielberg called Minority Report. Do you remember that, with Tom Cruise? That came out in 2002. That was when machines would know when a crime was going to be committed, and then they could actually stop that from happening. Interestingly, Nick, I don't know whether you knew this, but on Sunday, the Home Office sent out a news release about asking the police forces in England and Wales to double up the use of facial recognition technology in order to stop crimes happening. So it's not such make-believe anymore. But there are lots of practical things that we need to consider, and I'm not sure that the conference was the correct forum for all of those things. It took the view that talking about safety, which I thought was quite an interesting positioning, it'd be interesting to hear what my colleagues think. It was the AI Safety Summit, it wasn't the AI Summit, and there's been lots of these gatherings in 2023, and there's one next month in New York.
And they've pledged to continue them. So there's going to be one, I think, in
6 months' time.
6 months' time.
In
Is
Korea.
That in Korea? And one in
Paris,
France, I think.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do they... I suppose bring it back to you before I bring Alex in, Maria. Do they serve a purpose? Is the fact that these conferences will convene, will bring issues to the fore, and ultimately, will they achieve their job of controlling the corporations?
Well, it's funny, it brings me back to the Christchurch Call, which was a similar conference which happened in 2019 in New Zealand, which was convened by Jacinda Ardern after the murder of 41 New Zealanders in mosques by a far-right terrorist. And she convened tech companies and governments from all around the world in what she called the Christchurch Call to stop radical disinformation and radicalisation happening on the tech platforms. And, there were lots of meetings, lots of photo calls, lots of, very worthy sounding statements came out of it. And has that changed to any extent, the amount of disinfo and radicalisation happening on the platforms? No, because in some sense, I think, the tech companies love to be invited to these things and politicians love to be photographed and filmed with them. It's it's a PR thing. But fundamentally, they're about re-establishing the order of things. They're not about changing the business model that is hurting people. They're just about having a PR thing to look like you're doing stuff. And I feel like this is, I've been to these things. We've all done the round of these kinds of worthy-sounding statements before, and I think this is just another one where people come on, get their photo taken, don't do any substantive work and move on to the next thing.
Let me bring you in at this point, Alex. You've worked with prime ministers in Number 10. You are a political animal through and through. Is there something at play here that many of us wouldn't immediately recognise with the conference? Is this AI conference, this convening that's just happened with a number of world leaders, is that actually another form of diplomacy at work here? Let me explain. Global Britain. Rishi Sunak's very keen to promote Global Britain. Joe Biden's not talking to him about trade deals, but he's sending over his vice president, and China are coming over here to talk about AI.
Yes, I think it's important to look at this conference through a diplomatic, political lens. Okay, as a forum to develop a workable set of global policies, very much still a work in progress, I think it's fair to say. Although I will just briefly touch on that. When, for example, the Climate Change Conference of the Parties started in, I think, the late 80s, early 90s. That probably then was seen as a kind of bit of a talking shop, bit of a waste of time. But of course now it's the main global forum that sets the rules for how countries are going to mitigate against climate change. So these things can work, regardless of whether you think a global conference is a way to do it or not. But coming back to the AI Safety Summit, this was a chance for Rishi Sunak to put Britain on the global stage, in perhaps a way that this country hasn't been lately. If you take the view that, for example, Britain leaving the EU reduces and diminishes Britain's role in the world, then you could similarly take the view now that doing something like this on probably the most important issue facing our sort of immediate future, apart from climate change, war, etc., if you take the view that it's important for Britain to act as that convener, then this was a great success, regardless of the actual substance, ironically, that came out of it.
Well, now, again, someone looking at the conference today will have picked up lots of comments about how the humanity is protected, that this is a big step towards protecting us. I'm slightly confused, and you worked for a Conservative administration, is that their instinct is not to regulate lots of things. Yet on the one hand, Rishi Sunak says this is an existential threat to our human existence, but he's making the case that to drive innovation, to have the Britain as a leader in AI, we don't actually want to over-regulate. Can you square that circle with such a threat?
Yes, it's an interesting one. Actually, I think there's a great opportunity for the UK in this space. You've got America, which generally speaking leans towards doing as much as you can, as often as you can, and freedom and innovation and all the rest of it. You've got the EU, which seems to be doing roughly what the EU usually does, which is maximum control, right? Regardless of what you think about that. Britain can occupy literally a space in the middle between those two views. Britain can occupy a space that says, well, look, let's not stifle the obvious benefits that humanity can glean from this technology, but at the same time, what are the practical steps that we can take to make sure that to make sure the negative sides aren't too bad? I think probably the most important thing that came out of the summit was this deal which said that public officials from America, Britain, Singapore will actually be able to see the new AI models as they're being developed, which is really important.
It sounds fantastic. Can it really happen? Can you see these powerful corporations, as you say, who are being interviewed by prime ministers, actually adhering to what is actually a voluntary requirement at the moment to submit everything to examination? Are you confident that'll happen?
I am not, and I'll tell you why. Because the government here in the UK has its own voluntary but statutory commitment to report on how it uses AI in the delivery of public services like social welfare or immigration policy, and it has signally failed to do any of that. So when it has not just the opportunity but the encouraged obligation, put it that way, to actually report on and have some kind of transparency and accountability, there is none. But I will say, coming back to, I think one of the successes, and I think it's really significant, of this summit has been getting China, first of all, inviting China, having the political courage to do that, and secondly, expending a significant amount of political capital to bring them to really, ask them to be there.
I think that people were very sceptical about that.
They were.
But Ardy, a quick word on that. You wanted to come back before I move us on.
Yeah, I think one of the things which was missing, and in fact in the UK, the Information Commissioner's Office has mentioned it this week, is the issue of privacy. Because there's a huge impact on people's privacy. And the example I gave you about facial recognition is a good one. If we're going to have mass surveillance of people who are going about their ordinary business, going to a pub, going to a shop, doing their own thing, but we're monitoring them, that we're looking at their faces in the hope that we might find someone who is a convicted criminal who may be, likely to commit an offence. Fine, but how many people are actually being arrested in court as a result of use of that technology? Is that an appropriate use of technology?
Alex, I'd like to return to you, because whilst politicians have been gathering to talk about the threat of AI, only today did I get a glimpse that they acknowledge one of the real threats of AI that we've already seen in the digital world is the threat to democracy. 2024, Rishi Sunak reportedly said today that will be the first election where AI is employed during an election.
Yeah.
You know, whatever anyone's political stance, this is a huge threat to democracy, isn't it?
Well, it's something that we're not ready for. I don't think people quite realise how much of an impact it's going to have because, as we know, in elections, they are highly competitive, they are high stakes. There are going to be people who wish to influence things in the way that they prefer, whether they're foreign actors, foreign governments, or even just actors within countries who wish to move electorates in certain ways. The AI technology means that the ability to manipulate, to misrepresent, is almost unlimited. And, for example, in Britain, our own major political parties have absolutely no idea how this stuff works. So it's not even as if they are going to deploy it in legitimate ways. And by the way, I think there are legitimate ways to deploy this in an electoral setting. For example, you can have perfectly legitimate mass personalisation of communications, much as you used to do with letters. You know, you can personalise a letter, right? It's the same thing, but in a slightly different text setting. But I don't think our political parties here, because they don't know how to utilise it in positive ways, they therefore don't know how to counter the negative ways it can be used.
Maria, isn't the truth, though, that we've had in elections and claims since Brexit even of interference in elections, false material being put out there, false videos, false narratives. Whatever the government may or may not try and regulate before then, it's the responsibility of the platforms who share this misinformation, isn't it, that need to be held to account so they can clamp down on the fake videos. We had the one of Starmer abusing, allegedly, a member of his staff. We've had some that are just fun but could be used harmlessly. You know, what is there that will persuade the platforms, the companies, to call a halt to this stuff the minute it's published?
Well, first of all, you don't persuade them, you order them. You use the statutory instruments that are available to you as a state to protect democracy. And that is not something we've seen yet. So,
do we have enough tools?
Of course we do. Well, so, I mean, we could sort of, in this country, end up with the worst of both worlds. So we have the Online Safety Act, which came into power just last week, which is the worst of both worlds because it does nothing to cut off the business model of these companies who use personalised advertising, massive surveillance of people's data, their online lives. They pull in data not just from what they observe of you on their websites, but they buy data sets from medical providers, from education providers, so that they've got a complete picture of people's entire lives and use that to manipulate them. You know, you talk about personalised electoral communications. That's what Cambridge Analytica did. And I think we all have a problem with Cambridge Analytica and what they did and how they acted.
But a video that could go viral, that looks totally authentic, can be communicated within hours to millions of people. I think the Keir Starmer fake one reached 1.5 million people in 3 hours.
Of course it did. And you know why? It's because it is in the interest of the companies that are disseminating that material, that are amplifying it with force to put disinformation out because it drives clicks. So if you can talk about, putting something like the Online Safety Act, all it does is reduce freedom of expression without actually cutting off the business model, which is the problem. You know, people are always going to say objectionable things, they're going to have objectionable opinions, but the ability to industrially force deep fakes into people's mailboxes, into their scrolls, that is something that is completely, it is novel. And, over the last year, we have seen every single one of the platforms has cut their safety teams, has cut their moderation teams. The first people out the door to get fired are the people who are protecting democracy. So you don't ask the companies, can you please do a better job? You tell them to.
Adi, one interesting aspect about AI that was flagged up, and in fact, again, Elon Musk said this, but he put a positive spin on it. He talked about AI being able to develop that close personal relationship with people through their computers or ultimately robots, that people come dependent on them. And he gave some positive examples of how that may be good. but actually it could be a force for bad. You develop a positive relationship, someone trusts an AI caricature, they're going to believe what they say, whether it's interfering with elections or worse. Could we see an epidemic, uncontrolled rise in, shall we say, more powerful ways of encouraging people to commit suicide, to go on single terror attacks? Is that a threat that they can be dealt with?
There's always a threat with technology. It's good and it's bad. We can't stop the bad, you know. And
but the government is saying they can regulate us to do that.
But how successful is that regulation going to be? And who are they going to get to actually regulate it? And what are the liabilities and responsibilities of the people who, let's, for example, say that I've got an organisation, but I have autonomous, intelligent machines doing the decision-making in my business and humans are not involved. Am I responsible? Does the responsibility sit with me? Or is it with the programmer who wrote the code? Or is it with the source code? And if there was harm, damage and distress caused as a result of these robots, you know, is it the robot at fault? Is it the person who owns them, controls them? And let's say they say we have no control over them. So who's responsible? I don't think it's an answer we've got today.
Well, let me pose that to someone who's worked in government. I mean, do you have any confidence that the aims and aspirations that came out from this conference and the sort of concerns that we've discussed here, the government is actually capable of dealing with this through regulation and enforcement?
The problem is when it comes to government trying to regulate new and emerging technologies, and we have seen this countless times before, government is usually several steps behind the practical applications of said technology. And I think it will be the same with AI. That the process that government takes to actually develop this regulation is way slower than the process of innovation of the technology itself. So unless there is some kind of live discussion between the two sectors, you're just going to see a situation where the regulation will always lag behind. So it will never be fully satisfactory. And in most cases, the regulation seeks to fix problems that either aren't there or just aren't relevant anymore. And it doesn't keep up with the new problems and the new harms that emerge.
Should that mean more powers for governments to take executive authority without necessarily the laborious and sometimes, shall we say, difficult process of legislation?
Well, the first, Rishi Sunak's first response to that, you've had a great summit, now what are you going to do, was legislation takes a long time. So he's not planning to do anything.
Yeah.
Straight out. But, you know, he doesn't have a long time, so I guess that makes sense.
Well, President Biden has an executive order. Now,
yes,
you know, maybe that's a tool we should see in more governments.
Yeah, and it's funny, coming back to something you were saying earlier, we're seeing a strange inversion of the usual state of affairs where the US is kind of light hand, regulatory, you know, light touch, and the European Union has a more hands-on, whereas actually the Biden's executive order is much more detailed and expansive and comprehensive across a range of AI harms and opportunities compared to the EU's AI Act, which is actually much less kind of muscular, if you like. But I would actually come back and say that, yes, it's hard to get ahead of specific technologies because you don't know what they're doing until they've killed a few people, and then we try and stop it there. You know, you do have the precautionary principle, which some people would use, but we seem to kind of say that we use that in health and we use that in airline safety, but we don't use that in technology. Okay, I think that's a bad decision, but that's what we seem to have chosen to do as a society. We can't regulate technology very easily, but we can regulate companies. And I think the AI space is marked by the absolute consolidation of computing power, data, and political capital. It's basically there are 4 companies worldwide running large language models, and they're all American. And so can I just say, it's really important to understand that what is happening here in Bletchley Park this week was a shuffling for position so that those 4 companies can keep dominance and ensure it into the next decades. And I think what we have is we've got competition regulation. You know, I called Elon Musk an oligarch because he is an oligarch. Oligarchs are people who want to have monopolies and will do anything to get them.
Let me, if I may, just draw this to a close, because in some ways this has been quite depressing, even though extremely informative. Are you optimistic, in a word, that the governments around the world can lead on regulation and control AI, or will AI control us?
No, I think government's role is to bring people together. It's not just about big companies and small companies. It's not just about rich countries and poor countries. It's not just about you and me, it's everyone. We all have a stake in terms of what the outcome of all of this is going to mean. And I don't think governments are the place where the solution's going to be found. But just picking up on your point.
Very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. I think there needs to be a proper AI framework, regulatory framework, which is both short, medium and long term, because we don't know where the direction of travel is going to go.
OK, I'm going to have to cut you there, but thank you, Adi Kohler, Maria Farrell and Alex Crowley for joining me today on that discussion that at least has shed some light on the subject for me, and I hope for everyone watching. Thanks again to my guests for joining me, and don't forget to check out TRT World for more lively debate and conversation. But for now, from me and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.